part-time. However, we know that part-time is also full-time for us, as you know. I've never had
Christine Beckett, Sister of Charity of Nazareth. And we're delighted to have Chris and all of you with us. Carol D'Angelo in a moment will be introducing Chris and setting some context, but I'd like to start us off in prayer. This prayer comes from an IHM sister, Julie Vieira, and I adapted it lightly. It's called A Prayer of Unfolding. So let's center ourselves and open our minds, open our hearts to this conversation. We hear your voice calling us, urging us into the future, a new moment, to a transformation that demands nothing less than our lives, our memories, our hopes, what we have built and what we have dreamed. We are unsure of what lies ahead, unimagined landscapes with tough choices and rough terrain, yet filled with the possibility of life abundant, thriving, overflowing. Create in us a new spaciousness, one that frees us to enter fully into the mystery of your charity, in union with one another, in community. Help us to let go of that which is no longer helpful, and to embrace fiercely what will be needed to unfold the mission of charity into the future. Inspire our elders, fire up our young, and be faithful to your promise to create something new in our life, for the company of charity, for religious life, and for the world. Hover over us, Spirit of God, just as you hovered over earth at the dawn of creation, bringing new life, energy, and a future full of hope. Amen.
Amen.
So now if Sister Carol D'Angelo will set our context for today.
Well, thank you, everyone, and welcome. As you are probably aware, the Charity Earth Network core group, what we call ourselves, is Terry and John Shively and CJ Willie, Carol Jean Willie. So just thought I would make sure we're aware of that. And so we really welcome you, Chris, Sister Christine Beckett, Sister of Charity of Nazareth, to our conversation today. And it is a conversation. When we invited Sister Chris to this Zoom conversation, she asked if we could have a conversation rather than a presentation. And so we're hoping the way we're doing this is I'll begin by setting the context and asking Chris a question, maybe a few follow-up ones, and then Sister Carol Jean Willie will move on to another major question, and John then to a major question. And then Terry will lead us in the where we all join in the conversation. So just to set the context, many of you perhaps were on the call last spring, the LCWR. They offered 2 webinars, 2 conversations, where they invited women religious and all its congregations that belong to LCWR to a call on transformative justice. And on that call, Carol Zinn reminded us that as women religious, we have responded in the past always to the signs of the times. We responded through direct service. It seems then that we moved to political advocacy, and she specifically mentioned network lobby. And then today she said that today's signs of the times call us to the work of transformative justice. And for those of us who are engaged in peace and justice work, our ears really perked up. We wanted to hear more of what this meant, what it looked like, especially compared to what we were already doing. So while we wait to hear more from LCWR, the Charity Earth Network Core Group decided to gather us together so that those in the charity family might have a conversation on transformative justice. And we thought Sister Chris would be the right person to have this conversation with. So I'd just like to say a few words, and this is from my perspective. So I invite you to listen to what I say about my experience of transformative justice, and then see how does it kind of resonate with yours, because this might be a way of us getting our juices going as we have this conversation with Chris. To say that if you are like me, you have been transformed by the people and more than human communities that you have been privileged to journey with. Perhaps your experience, like mine, is that caring, listening, and presence to one another really helps that transformational process. So as we set the context for today's conversation, we might want to remind ourselves of the times we engage with and are present to people and the planet, and how we have listened and responded to their cries as well as their hopes. Accompaniment and presence bring with it an awareness of suffering of people and our common home. Needs that we cannot meet are so overwhelming at times that our hearts, even our spirits, are broken. Our efforts at addressing root causes confirm that existing systems and structures, instead of offering social protection, are stressed, breaking down, and in need of systemic change. And we see the need for systemic change in all our institutions, be it church, education, health, political, to name a few. We know that we need to grow in contemplative, active listening and dialogue and greater collaboration. And we believe we can do together what we cannot do alone. So I believe the seeds of transformative justice have already taken root in us, and that we are now invited to grow those seeds, to nourish them. So we are excited to hear, learn, explore more, and eager to respond to this call to transformative justice. In the flyer publicizing today's conversation, Terry's words give us food for thought. This approach, transformative justice, both builds on the significant transformations we have already experienced. It also invites us to a new vision and way of doing JPIC work. Today's webinar is an attempt both to see the charism of charity, is an attempt both to see what the charism of charity might offer this process, and to see how the charism of charity is invited to deepen and grow through this process. So we are blessed, Sister Chris, to have you join us today. May we dream and imagine together what transformative justice might look like for us, the company of charity, as we are called by God from the future. So with those thoughts, and I know I wish I had sent them to you before, Chris, and to give you a chance to just even think about them. But I'd like to ask you this first question. How do you understand transformative justice? And since this is a conversation, you might want to respond directly to this question or give us a little different way of entering into it. Feel free to begin the conversation any way you wish. Thank you. Oh, and you're muted, so you need to get yourself unmuted. Great.
Well, good afternoon, everybody. I hope y'all are doing well.
We are.
We are. Carol, I thank you for this opportunity and especially thank you for your question. I appreciated the time that I've had to pray with and reflect on just what for me is transformative justice. I don't have all the answers, but I can only speak from experience and from prayer, from discernment, and from a great love for our world. And so I offer you the following consideration. I understand or grasp transformative justice as a process that involves the prerequisite is transformation of self, being in touch with one's person, one's whole being, everything that is around one. And how is that
No, you muted yourself, I guess, unintentionally. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So you see, that was an experience of it. I don't know what you heard or didn't hear. I don't know how long it went. But anyway, the prerequisite is the transformation of self, transforming self, being aware of oneself. That is to get in touch with how I am open or closed to the process of transformation, which we as, and it's a quote, but it's also just ideas that come from Victoria Lours, the co-founder of the Wild Church Network. And she introduces us to edge walkers who connect across faith traditions. And I quote her, "My personal spirituality is rooted in the Christ tradition, a term I prefer over Christian, which is a label I find difficult to swallow these days. Rather, I see myself as an edge walker, wandering along the hemlines of the Christ tradition that has brought many people, including me, deep pain, and has also brought many people, including me, deep joy and meaning. I adopted this term edgewalker from nature writer Terry Tempest Williams. Edgewalkers occupy a thin space and are by definition a bit lonely. The Encyclopedia of Religious and Nature describes her edgewalking as traveling the narrow space between the religious tradition she credits for having forged her soul and her direct and very personal experiences in nature that have revealed a truth of their own. Most people inhabit the vast spaces on both sides of edges, but those called to the thresholds, the edges in between, live in these thin spaces and recognize one another when they meet. The edges between biosystems are called ecotones. These thresholds usually contain the most biodiversity and therefore are the most excellent, resilient. She notes that the time is coming soon when the edges we inhabit will start to redefine the center. Then we will need to lean on and learn from one another as we together engage in the work of that redefining. Each of us is characterized by our own unique gifts, communities of influence, and a particular bioregion. But we cannot behave as silos any longer. Lours reminds us that the mystics are the ones who stand on these edges. The edges where the mystics live. She goes on to say that she once attended a conference organized by Ed Bastian, a Buddhist mystic, whose call is defined by his deep respect for and encouragement of interfaith spirituality. The gathering consisted of spiritual leaders from diverse traditions to consider what we had most in common, living on the same planet. The group talked about how their faith traditions could connect them with the actual soil and water and the creatures of earth, and how that connection could be a spiritual foundation for the environmental movement. She shares that what she remembered most was a golden thread, and I ask you, remember that, a golden thread of mystical connection with divine presence that all of us expressed in our relationships with the natural world. Even in their diversity, they all felt that we had more in common with one another, that is, edgewalkers from other traditions, than with people more firmly planted in the center of their own faiths. They have always been edgewalkers, those who didn't follow along with the status quo, and at that edge, spiritual and nature are in unbroken relationship. Thus, how do we become aware of the gift of spirituality of the mystics, the edgewalkers? Can we go out of our comfort zones to see, to be with each other? With this in mind, I now share with you my definition of transformative justice, which is to be open to the transformation of self and others on the journey of transformation as we engage to transform systems, be they religious, political, social, that respond to violence, harm, and abuse on any level. It is a walk in faith, whatever that may be, whatever that faith may be, that must be rooted in deep contemplative prayer and dialogue, so that all are engaged in the act of transformation that brings forth and results in justice and charity as equal partners. In some ways, it is, as Martina Cartman defines it, transformative justice is just the things we do to support each other to survive in this world. That's rather simplistic definition, but I believe it is a basis. But I also believe we're called in going deeper and deeper and deeper. Thus, you see, I come with deep belief and experience that transformative justice must be rooted in a deep spirituality of the love of and for God, all creation, all our sisters and brothers, human as well as plant and animal life, to assure justice is being lived and served in all systems, religious, political, ecological, cosmological, whatever. The key point is, it is rooted in our spirituality, our relationship with a loving God, who even shared God's only begotten Son, the Christ, so that we could learn and see the depth and the breadth of the love of our God. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Chris. So I'm thinking it's 1:23, and while I have a few other questions, maybe I'm going to hold them and let CJ go next, so that we can maybe hear all the three areas and then see where this leads us. Thank you, CJ.
Hi, Chris. Okay. My questions are, what special gifts or insights does the charism of charity bring to the process of transformative justice? That's the first part. I think I'll let you answer that first and then ask the second part. And you're muted again.
Got it. Good to see you, CJ.
Same here.
Well, first of all, CJ and everybody, I would like to offer all of us in the Charity Federation to consider adding these three cosmic elements of embracing diversity, interiority, and communion for the sake of mission. I'm going to put that right out front to you. Reason I do is I thank CJ greatly because we spent a lot of time on Zoom meetings over the last year and a half in walking with her and she with us and preparing a major preparation for us to engage in and uncover the dynamics of the mantra and logo that we had for our General Assembly of 2023 in the SCN congregation. And that theme was tread lightly, embracing diversity, interiority, and communion. For what? For the sake of mission. And it was, she gave a great presentation and engagement with us. So I, again, thank you. And that's why I'm asking you to consider it. It's a process of the transformative justice. It really is. It is the basis of it. It's filled with mysticism. I can't tell you how many people had confused by the three words. And when the more I thought about it, my background is spiritual theology. And the more that it hit me, these are the basic, three of the most basic, there's quite a few, embracing diversity, interiority, and communion. It is the depth of mystical union that all of us are invited to be part of. So first of all, I would invite us to look at those and tread or walk lightly with ourselves and with others, and but to begin to enter more deeply into that mystical experience. And it's all done, and why? There's only one reason, because God is love and calls us to that, and it is for the sake of mission. Secondly, I suggest that you consider returning possibly, if you haven't read it, to the article by Megan Clark, who wrote, it's entitled, "The Complex but Necessary Union of Charity and Justice, Insights from the Vincentian Tradition for Contemporary Catholic Social Teaching." She wrote this in 2012, and it can be found in the Vincentian Heritage Journal, Volume 31, Issue 2. I would truly, if you haven't read it, or if you have, to go back and let it speak to you. Okay, so when I saw your question, I immediately recalled this article because it truly set my heart aflame. And I offer the following points that are recognized in the article as special gifts or insights that the charism of charity brings to the process of transformative justice. First of all, Vincent de Paul and Louise de Marillac, when you say one, you must walk with the other. Thank God. There itself was transformation. Placed charity at the heart of Christian life. And all their programs, especially Vincent in his original years, for social transformation. They didn't have those words then, but it's all there. The ministry they inspired focused on justice and the many injustices within society. Third, Vincent, and this is a critical point, applied organization to the discussion of charity and justice. Solidarity with our neighbor requires it recognizes that the poor often suffered a great deal more than through a lack of organized assistance than from lack of charitable persons. And I have thought about that and how true that is. Especially if you've ever done fundraising for mission. Thus, what emerges is a model of cultivating solidarity through justice and charity as integral to the life of Christian discipleship. Next, effective charity requires a close examination of the situation of suffering. It requires both charity and justice in the process of organization. The three elements are clear in all of Vincent's lists of rules and regulations. First, the dignity of the poor. Second, attention to particularity and context. And third, reminders of the connection of love of neighbor to love of God. Fostering long-term works was continued by Frederick Ozanam. The knowledge of social well-being and reform is learned not from books, nor from public debate, but in climbing the stairs to the poor person, the person's garret, sitting by his or her bedside, feeling the same cold that pierces that person. To be a woman and men of charity, we must cultivate solidarity with the poor and marginalized through listening and encountering them as equals. And I would now add that I believe that Vincent would add all of our creation, our cosmology. We are all in this together, and we need together. And they are our neighbors, they are the people, and all of God's creation is here for us to love and to serve. For Vincent and Louise, charity was at the heart of their ministries to the poor and the vulnerable and marginalized. It was key for Vincent and Louise also embodied an understanding of justice, which, while included political justice, reached well beyond politics. It recognized justice as a complex and rich virtue itself. Justice is a virtue which cannot be limited to the realm of politics. Justice, like charity, is a virtue which needs to be operative at every level of society, both personal and institutional. But this final point, I ask you to listen really carefully. Following the French Revolution, Ozanam mobilized and empowered Catholic students arguing, and says, the problem which divides us today is not a political problem. It is a social one. It is a matter of knowing which will get the upper hand, the spirit of selfishness or the spirit of sacrifice. Whether society will go for ever increasing enjoyment and profit, or for everyone devoting themselves to the common good. Many people have too much and still want more. Others do not have enough or do not have anything at all, and they want to take by force what is not being given to them. A war is threatening between these two groups. On one side, the power of wealth, on the other side, the force of desperation. We must get in between these two groups, at least to reduce the impact if we cannot stop it. Does it sound like today's situation we find ourselves in? It blew me away when I read this again. And it was years ago I read this, but now, as I look at our society today, in the United States of America, the whole world, look where we are, folks. I bet that says it all. That's it, CJ.
Okay, thank you. The second part of the question, and I think you have already gone into this, but if there's anything else you want to add, it's what call does this process of transformative justice extend to the charism of charity?
I would just add one thing very briefly right now that I think the third question will come into it a little more, and that is we need now to find what ways can we be the edge walkers? What ways can we now, you heard that, is it either or can we somehow please God? Is there an in-between that we can continue to build on, that it doesn't come to the disaster that it possibly could?
Thank you, Chris.
You're welcome.
Hi, Chris. I'm gonna have to apologize. I think they're mowing outside right now, which is maybe indicative of something. I'm not sure what in this moment, but my question, well, first of all, thank you for that. And I put a link to the article in the chat if
Right.
folks want to check it out, because certainly sounds like something I want to dig into more, and just sounds like it was very applicable to our times. But my question is going to take us maybe in a little bit of a different direction. When LCWR started talking about transformative justice, I had some friends who clued me into the fact that transformative justice is, in fact, a term used in some other organizing communities, especially communities of color. And
Rose.
So, John, maybe you can notice, we think you froze. Now you're back, I think. So begin again. Okay, John.
I'm sorry, I don't know where I froze, so I guess I'll,
About your friends and what they were
oh,
telling. Yes.
sorry about that. Yeah, my friends clued me into this fact that transformative justice is a phrase, a concept already used in community organizing, particularly in communities of color, around violence and sort of moving from a system of retributive justice to this idea of transformative justice. So my question really is there something we can learn there? Are we talking about two different things? And what do communities of color maybe have to offer us in terms of understanding transformative justice?
John, thanks for that question. Because that's how I got involved. It wasn't through white folk. And I wanted to share this with you. I wasn't sure I would, but I think I need to. And that is because it's out of experience. And I go back to it as, one of those kinds of experiences that in a contemplative nature, it's that touchstone, and it's real for yourself in your own discernment. When I was 20 years old, of course, was white as I am right now. And except I was even whiter in the sense of coming from Wisconsin, northern Wisconsin at that time, born in Milwaukee. We moved up into the Fox River Valley and then area. So Little Chute, Wisconsin. I'm sure you've all heard of Little Chute, Wisconsin. It's a metropolitan of the world. Had great education. If it wasn't for that, I'm not sure where I would have been today. And it was a transformative experience that I was in college in Racine, at the Racine Dominicans. I was educated by the Racine Dominicans, and I knew there was something I had to do. We were involved very much, with Father Gruppy at that time in Milwaukee, riding the bus. And then also with racism was raising its head. And of course, the Vietnam War. It was a great time in my life. And it was a time that God was very much alive through other people, especially in my life. And so one summer I volunteered with the Glen Mary Sisters. all the way down in Georgia. And it was a small, I'm not going to use county name or anything, but in Georgia. And it was the year that integration was being enforced. Small, but the largest county in the largest state east of the Mississippi River. So you can find out what county that is if you look it up. There were more Black folk than there were white. And needless to say, my mother was not too into this, but it didn't matter because I was going. So did, and had to take the bus all the way from Wisconsin down to Georgia. And while there, I was a volunteer with the Glen Mary Sisters. And it was an experience that has changed my life. And I mean it. It's so mind-boggling as well as freeing. And I remember the first Saturday that I was there, I arrived. And there were 2 Glen Mary Sisters there and Glen Mary priest in that area. And mission, you know, in Glen Mary is very much engaging the people, always has been, because we're never there to be forever. It is to work with the folks to build it up, what's needed. And when I arrived, I'll just go back a little bit. I arrived in Atlanta, Georgia. I mean, in Augusta, Georgia. And it was the time of the riots. And we were in the bus depot for 36 hours with police surrounding the building. And I was so excited thinking and I thought, oh my God. And I thought, my mother, can you imagine my family? Oh, it was just not good. But finally got to this little town, lived through that, got there. And the first Saturday, the sisters that I was there said, I said, I'd like to go downtown and pick up a few things. And they said, no problem, go ahead. They didn't say anything. They just said, just be aware. And so I was, and I found out I was the only white person going into these stores. And I saw loads, of wagons coming in, even from plantation areas with Black people on them. Because it's the afternoon, that's Saturdays, they always did their shopping. And so white folk, unless they were, store operators, weren't present. So here I am, and I thanked a man who opened the door for me, a Black man, and the white people behind the counter said, we don't do that. And so it was a learning experience for me. It's not that I am not judgment, okay? I can't judge either or. It wasn't that at all. It was a learning experience. But through that experience of that whole summer, I was the only white teacher in the first ever, it was one of those early programs in the summer to get students to come in. We had over 1,000, 2,000 Black children, and we had one family that was a white family of children. And I was the only white teacher in the high school section. I taught English. And it changed my life because I would be referred to by certain people as girl and by another population as ma'am. And then I figured out why. So I learned what it was like for the African American in a way that I never would have learned if I wouldn't have gone and been there. Again, not judgment at all, but rather going, holy cow, this is incredible, And of all of that whole experience in one night, and then meanwhile, the Glen Marians, the gal who is a volunteer with me, worked with getting a program started. It was the very first intercultural, interracial program for, childcare. So that the big thing was that women could go work, be able to work and know their children were being taken care of. And I'm going to share this story with you. So the first night I was there, when the kids were there were 5 kids, and there were four black and 4 white came. And it was this little parish. I mean, we had a room that was the size of a big kitchen, basically. And this is where the daycare center was run. And when the parents came to pick the children up at the end of that first day, I was there. We were watching, standing with the parents, black and white. And one white little girl and one black little boy kissed each other on the lips, saying goodbye, and so looking forward to seeing each other the next day. And we looked up, and I was watching, and everybody froze. And all of a sudden, one of the women said, and it was a white woman who said, a mother, "Isn't this interesting? Children do not see color." We took let a lot of air out at that point because we didn't know what was going to happen. And thank God the next day, those 8 children came back. Now today, it's one with all black children, mostly, But the point is the learning that was, and I worked with, and we were run off the road twice, 2 of us volunteers by the Klan. That was an experience. They didn't hurt us, but it was quite an experience. So needless to say, your question, John, is yes. I was very much involved. The Black teachers walked me through that whole summer on how do you walk with this and how do you stay alive and walking through it? And how do you stay above it and still try to be able to love all involved? And it ain't easy. So to your point, that came to me when I saw the question and now heard it again. And I'm sorry I've taken so long, but I think it explains, again, that transformation that you have to go through, because we don't have all the answers. We don't. We have to be together. And yes, I would dare say that, the whole Undoing Racism program really was a whole transformational program, mostly put together by the Black community. And you wanted it to be put together by the Black community. So, thanks.
No need to apologize. I mean, I think the powerful sharing, and I really appreciate you telling us your stories and that experience. I mean, just wonderful. Terry, I think, is going to lead us in the next part in inviting everyone else into the conversation and some questioning. And so I'll let Terry take it away.
Let's just take a moment of quiet to let Chris's very beautiful answers to our questions resonate a bit in our spirits and our hearts, and see what question arises there for each of us, or something that we might want to share. Okay. So if anyone would like to share what's stirring in them, maybe offer your answer to one of the questions, to ask Cribs to probe more deeply something that she shared, or whatever is going on inside you. So you can either raise your hand physically or raise your hand using the little reaction emoji on Zoom, and I'll call on you.
Chris, thank you. This is Marge. Thanks for your reflections. As you were talking, I was thinking about how significant it is that justice be coupled with ongoing personal reflective moments about what we see and experience, and how significant that is, and how little space there is for that in our current culture. The whole arena of violence that we live in is so incredibly easy to fall into. But as you were telling your own story and your early transformation in the work of justice, I was thinking, what can possibly bring us back to that kind of reflective, intentional awareness about the world around us, because there is violence everywhere we turn. And the other piece of that is something that you also referred to, the need for systemic change means that things in the system have to change. And basically, without reflection, how do we do that? It's as much a commentary as anything, but it's what I was thinking about as you were speaking. So thank you.
Thank you. If I respond to that just very briefly, I agree. It's very frustrating today. Where do you go? How do you get there? But I do think what we need to do, I search my soul, and it's always go back to those depth moments that let you know. And I do believe what we need to do, somehow we need to get into those small little spaces with people who are willing to walk together there. Look at how divided not only our countries, but populations in our churches. We aren't trying to work together anymore ecumenically that much. Now, that's a judgment statement that could be taken as judgment, but we're not crossing those boundaries as much and inviting. So, yeah, I think we have to start looking at that.
Just a comment to that, it does seem like one of the reasons for ecumenism to be not as helpful as it was 10 years ago, certainly in the work of justice, I think has to do with the fact that institutionalized religion is having the same strains put on it that exist everywhere else. And I think that people are making choices, especially young people, to not be as affiliated, not be as active through a religious institution. But it screams to me that as women religious, we've done so much to find ways to connect and network. And I keep thinking maybe there's something in us that can change that dynamic, because young people are really looking and they want that kind of connection. But it is so rare to find. And as these institutions all crumble apart, there goes all that opportunity. So thank you for your comments.
Yeah, sort of following along that line, I was struck, Chris, by what you said, that the thing that all religions have most in common is that we all live on this planet. And that seems so obvious, but it was really just a stunning insight for me that interfaith or ecumenical dialogue doesn't, shouldn't be discussing whether Jesus was God or not. But how are we all going to live together on this planet on fire? And I remember reading some of the stuff that's come out since Laudato Si. For example, there are Laudato Si groups I forget where in Africa, where Christians and animists and Muslims are meeting together in these Laudato Si groups and not arguing about religious questions, but saying, what can we do to have clean water in our village? And I think paradoxically, when you start at a place like that, eventually staying in it for the long haul will involve engaging spiritual questions. Nobody can stay in the struggle on anger for very long. It's a bright fire for a while, but it eventually consumes you and everybody else. So just how, shifting the discussion to we're all together on this planet on fire, what can we do about it? Seems very hopeful to me. I don't know if any of you have read Jonathan Ives' biography of Martin Luther King that came out last year. And it's really stunning how King was constantly fighting all his life people who wanted to use violence. And, if they kill one of ours, we'll kill one of theirs. And how he was constantly returning to that vision of the beloved community that hoped for the transformation of the enemy, quote unquote enemy, as well as of the self. And frankly, all those other movements did burn themselves out, didn't get very far. And how, as you began, Chris, thank you, how much our own inner transformation is required to stay in this struggle. So thank you for that.
Thank you.
Carol?
So I I raised my hand because I don't know where this thought came in terms of transformative justice, but it came with what Marge said and then Chris's response and Terry's. But before I say that, I do want to say thank you, Chris, because I think your stories just kind of reaffirmed for me how important it is for all of us to be in touch with our own stories. And then from there to see and ask ourselves where we see these elements of transformative justice. And since so many of us are so immersed in the universe story, I want to thank you again for emphasizing that communion and diversity and what is it that I'm forgetting, the interiority, because I think that it's always good to be reminded of that. But I wanted to link what I just heard through what Marge said and you, Chris, and then Terry, with some comments that I heard when we were facilitating some of those groups on the Synod. And then what happened yesterday in New York with the March to End Fossil Fuel. It was amazing in some of the groups when we had our Synod input. People started not necessarily finding life in their parish, but finding life through Catholic Climate Covenant, through those Laudato Si animator trainings that are going on and all the Laudato Si groups that there are, connecting with these movements, whether it be Franciscan Action Network. It's just amazing. And a lot of these are young people too. And so there's a transformation happening now, at least for some young people and also older people, that there's a connecting with not the traditional parish life that we had, but with some of these groups. And what were some of the things that were said? I mean, I think in every group that I was part of, how they were just so inspired what the sisters have done and how the sisters have helped move it along. And so with that, I kind of want to jump to how yesterday, I wasn't able to be at the march, but yesterday there was a press conference in front of Church of St. Paul that Catholic Climate Covenant organized for the young people, because they're really organizing a lot, the young people. And then the Catholic contingency marched up to the Green Faith, where the Green Faith had organized the People of Faith a contingency. And so while in some ways I don't say I'm connected to an interfaith movement or an ecumenical movement, I know through what I'm seeing, especially regarding my work around the climate and immigration, to tell you the truth, there is a lot of interfaith movement, ecumenical movement, people working together around the climate movement. And it gives me a lot of hope. So I'm trying to see, how do I see that as transformational justice? You know, the nuns and the nuns that I haven't been able to be involved in as much as I want. I think of the great work that they're doing, and I see them as a great resource. So I guess this is my sharing with you, and I would like to hear CJ's comment, but at some point, I don't know if Chris or others, I'd like to hear some more examples from us on this call before we end it, about where do we see some of this happening in our own lives? Because I think it is happening. I really do.
Annie Houghton.
I was really impressed by the sharing of maybe foundational experiences. As I listened to you, Chris, I was reminded of the time when I was in Kentucky. I'm from the North. I'm from Salisbury, Massachusetts. And before I went to Kentucky, I graduated from college in '65. And I taught in a Catholic school as a lay person in South Boston. And in South Boston, that time we were dealing with busing. And it was the poor schools in South Boston and the schools in Roxbury that were being bused. Great division, great anger, great racial poems were there. It was a time of political anger. The Vietnam War was there. And in the midst of all of that, I was working with the seminarians from La Salette and working in the south end of Boston, very, very poor area, now very rich, but very poor when I was there, and going into the projects and visiting families. I was so amazed as a white woman, and I was seen as a teacher, educated, and going in and seeing Black women with their children, very poor, not having much. And the seminarians were white men. The deference that we were given, they were so grateful we came to visit. They were sharing their food with us. They didn't have much, but they were giving these things to us. And I remember how awful I felt. It was a time of feeling the joy of going into their homes and being welcomed. But the inequality between us was so evident. And not knowing how to deal with being seen as above, seeing the disparity between us. The same happened when I was in Kentucky later on, as a white woman with all those African-American men and women in the stores. Yes, ma'am. No, ma'am. Opening the door for me. Again, there's a difference. Not knowing how to deal with it. Because from the North, when I was in interfaith settings, there was at least on the surface level, a sense of trying to accept each other as equals. Of course, looking back, it was really surface. It wasn't equal, but there was the appearance of that. I want to say that I work very much on the fringes. I'm on the edge. I work very much in interfaith communities. I go to a church that is really on the edge. It takes courage to stay there. It is lonely because who do you talk to? I think when we want to talk about diversity, interiority, and communion, and looking to the artists, I'm just going to share this real quick story. In Newburyport, they had what was called outdoor sculptures, and the theme was fracture. Fracture. And wonderful, wonderful sculptures that were made from all different kinds of materials. But there were some of the sculptures also had poetry, and I'm just going to read some of them. Gentle attention to the edges of things, the home of things. Bark ends, an atmosphere begins. Ground ends, and you. Subsequent notes of another sculpture. Within the ruin, resonating dissonance, stories slip away. The fall. Echoing back to humanity's original fracture, this installation depicts a current, heightened potential to reemerge back to our divine connection with the earth, self, and one another. It is a reminder that it is a time ripe for positive disruption and evolution. And just one more, called Passage. All things must pass through time and be changed.
Thank you,
Our
Amy.
artists can inspire us, can tell us the future. They are on the edges and bring us along.
Thank you, Annie. Very true. Very beautiful. CJ?
First of all, I want to thank you, Chris, and especially for using the term edgewalker, because I just came across that yesterday in Richard Rohr's column.
Yeah, exactly.
And thought, I love that term. But I also want to give a sign of hope in terms of the environmental movement is very interfaith. And here in Cincinnati, about 3 years ago, a very secular organization called Green Umbrella, which is an alliance of all of the organizations that work with the environment in the tri-state area, called for what they called an impact team on faith's contribution to this. And so 3 of us have co-chaired this, and it grew so fast that we ended up having to separate from Green Umbrella. We're now like a collaboration between them and Equation, which is an interfaith group. But we have people from Zoroastrian, Baha'i, Hindu, every tradition available, wanting to come around, care for the earth. And it's really been such a positive experience. 2 weeks ago, we had our Festival of Faiths here in Cincinnati, and 2,000 people showed up for it. And there's a lot of energy there. Nothing about doctrine. We don't even talk about religion. We talk about care for the earth. And I think at the UN, I served on the Interfaith Committee, and that's where I really began to understand how important that dialogue is. And just one other thing, the UN and the World Parliament of Religions have also decided that what is lacking in the whole environmental movement is the moral voice.
Yes.
And so 2 years ago, they put out a book entitled Faith for Earth, A Call for Action, which can be downloaded. And there's now an international movement on Faith for Earth, and the recognition that the only thing that's probably going to change it is that moral voice. And that's what we have to bring.
Thank you, CJ. Someone we haven't heard from? Okay, Patricia Bartolo doesn't know how to raise her hand, but she has something to say, so go ahead. Do you know how to turn your camera on, Patricia? And if you're talking, we can't hear you because you're muted. Well, maybe while Patricia tries to figure that out, anyone else?
I think Corinne has her hand up, Terry.
Okay, Corinne?
When we're,
Yeah, could you put your camera on, Corinne?
pardon?
Could you turn your video on? We can't see you.
She's
I
ready.
can see her.
I am on.
Okay, now you are, okay.
When we reflect on all of this, I think a lot of what holds us back are prejudices that just, and I one time heard the best definition of prejudice. It's emotional attachment to ignorance. Once we open our minds and hearts, that goes away, and then we can grow. But emotional attachment to ignorance is, to me, that's an extremely perfect definition.
Mhm.
And I heard that from my sister, who her daughter is living in Vancouver, British Columbia, and they went to visit. And when they were visiting, they stayed at a hotel on an island, and it was Gay Pride Week. And the woman who registered them said, it's Gay Pride Week. I hope that doesn't interfere with any of your preconceived ideas or notions. And my sister said it would have nothing, it would not change their minds at all. And she's the one who taught her that definition. And it really is true. It's about everything.
Thank you, Corinne. Mary Kay?
Hi, everyone. I'm Mary Kay. I was so happy to hear Frederick Ozanam's name mentioned. I spent years in Atlanta, Georgia, and I worked for the Vincent de Paul Society. And one of the things we realized was there were a lot of young people who really wanted to be involved, wanted to do something. But they felt so often when they went to meetings, they were going to meetings with their grandparents, because so many of the Vincent de Paul societies were older people who had the time to go make home visits, who were retired. Anyway, we started a young adult Vincent de Paul, where they didn't respond to financial requests, but we were very faithful to the home visit and going into the homes of the elderly, the housebound, just people who needed companionship. We're reading in the New York Times this epidemic of loneliness. So I guess it's, as we look at things today, the foundation, we didn't lose any of the foundation of St. Vincent de Paul Society, but trying to adapt it to the needs of today. So, and I experience also in the little bit I'm involved in ecological work. The young people are so passionate, and I think we have to, for myself, I can only say for myself, is to see the depth of spirituality in that. I just started rereading Laudato Si, was encouraged to do that before the new encyclical comes out. And my gosh, every paragraph is a meditation. So yeah, just my 2 cents.
Thanks, Mary Kay. I remember once I got a great insight from Dermot O'Murku, who said that for most of us, we started out very deeply rooted in a religious tradition, most of us Catholic. And we took on social issues or ecological issues based on that commitment. Young people today don't have that. They enter the dynamic through ecological groups, through justice groups. And inevitably, when you stay in one of those long enough, you start to ask spiritual questions. But the problem is, those of us who have done some thinking about it aren't around when they start to ask those questions. So, I would reinforce what Mary Kay said, how I think it's much more important. We sit around talking all day about why young people aren't joining us. All of us should be joining young people. And not to, and you might have to stay there a long time before anybody's going to ask you, this weird critter that you are, a priest or a nun, what you think about something. But accompanying, that Pope Francis mentioned so much, being willing to put in that time, and not being the leader, not being the one that everybody is coming to listen to, but to accompany, and then have something to offer when questions of spirituality come up. Carol? You're muted, Carol.
Muted, Carol.
I know I spoke before, but talk about stories and experiences. What Terry just said, in 2000, I went to Bard College on a weekend conference on our common home Earth. So that's 2000. And all these famous people spoke at it. I wish I could remember some of their names right now. But while there were some, I wasn't that old then, but while there were some older people my age too, but a lot of young students. And he's written some really very good books. So I'm trying to think of his name. He was one of the main speakers, but everyone else reiterated this. And I just couldn't help but think of this now. He said, if you really care about the earth, I'm going to ask 3 things of you. He said, each two practices each day. One practice is definitely spend some time in quiet and in centering prayer. He says, whatever you call it, he says, it could be anything. It could be just anything, but take some time to center yourself and enter into that silence. And then the second thing was, he said, be of service. The second thing would be, see how you can be of service that day. But the third thing he said, I thought was just so very powerful. He said, I know many of you here might not belong to any religion, he said, but one of the things we have to remember is, if you did belong to a religion or you have associated with a religion, you have to go back to its roots. You have to go back to what it really was, its primary teaching, what it was about, what it is about, because all of the major religions teach us that we're all one, that we're all connected. So this was in 2000. And it was really so very powerful, because I was sitting around with all these young kids and a lot of Catholics who had been Catholics, but were now Buddhists, which I meet so often on the streets and demonstrations. But I said very wise words. What are the main true beliefs within each faith? And then that centering prayer, and which brings me back, Chris, where you were talking about that getting into that contemplative spirit, that real contemplative spirit. So thank you.
I'm just going to add, Carol, because it's so pertinent to what you're saying, a quote from the Dalai Lama, who said, "It doesn't really matter what religion you are. What does matter is that you live deeply out of your tradition. Because if you live out of yours and I live out of mine, we will live in harmony."
Thanks, CJ. Mary Kay, do you have your hand up again?
No,
Okay, you just didn't put it down.
sorry.
It's all right. Anyone else?
Hey, Terry, I think
Chris?
as I was listening to everybody, two things hit me, and that was, one is also Taizé. If you think the experience of Taizé, I've been there, was hoping to go this last year and as part of a sabbatical. However, due to some health issues, I never got the sabbatical finished anyway. But I was there a good number of years ago, and the week that I was there, the Brothers of Taizé, there was a group from Palestinian young people and Jewish young people from Israel and those areas. And they were there for the whole week praying together in the Church of the Reconciliation with all the others, but also talking through differences as young people, and found out how much they had in common. But it all was centered in that whole element that Taizé brings for young people and the solidarity movement of that. And if ever you have a chance to experience Taizé, it is worth the effort. And we've stayed in touch over all these years, and it's just amazing to see what they're doing and what they've done quietly, very quietly. And they have a huge, huge solidarity in 40 countries of young people throughout the world. And the second thing I would suggest too is, and it was something I had in my mind to say, but obviously it wasn't necessary, or I didn't say it, was be sure to, if you haven't, Connie Fitzgerald, who is a Carmelite sister in Baltimore. And her latest book, actually it's called Desire, Darkness, Hope, Theology in Time of Impasse, engaging the thought of Constance Fitzgerald, OCD. But in there, she goes into, we are at a time of dark night in our whole world. And the dark night is not to be feared in mysticism. It's there to be lived. And many times there are no answers. But we must keep walking the walk and talking the talk, not just talk the talk, but walk the walk, as other traditions might say. But I would suggest that to get in touch with that, and even their experience in that Carmel, which is just about 30 minutes from here. I'm at Bon Secours right now. And how life is coming back to their convent, if you will, their abbey there. But it's the work they had to do as Carmelite nuns to get back in touch with what is it that they're really needing to be about, and yet true to their call. You can't deny the call, So it is something, and it's touched me deeply. And we've had some conversations, and it's a tough one to read. It's mysticism in in the dark night of the soul and the spirit. But it's not something to fear, because as in the darkest night, God shines as bright as the sun. It's just that we can't see it. Now, how mystic is that?
Thank you very much, Chris. And we're coming to the end of our time. So again, thank you so much, Chris, for that very, very rich and thought-provoking, as the comments indicate, presentation. And you certainly gave us a lot to pursue more fully, to go deeper into. Thanks as well to CJ and Carol and John for their engaging you and drawing this out of you. And thanks to all of you who participated and your wonderful contributions. We will be sending, hopefully, the recording around. And this will not be the last time you hear from the Charity Earth Network on transformative justice. So stay tuned for further rich and deep conversations. So many blessings and many thanks to Chris and many thanks to all of you.
Thanks to all of you too. Yep. I know.
And Carol, you're the one who has to turn us off.